You may remember the smell before anything else, that distinct, almost sweet chemical scent that hit you the moment you walked through the heavy doors of your elementary school on a Monday morning. It wasn't quite like anything else you'd encounter in life, a combination of floor wax and chalk dust and something from the cafeteria, maybe mystery meat already cooking for lunch 4 hours away. The doors themselves were solid, heavy metal or wood with that long horizontal bar you had to push, and they closed behind you with a decisive thunk that said, "You're here now, you're inside, the school day has begun." The hallways stretched out in front of you, linoleum floors polished to a shine by the janitor who'd been there since before your parents went to this school, or so it seemed. The floor had that particular pattern, speckled usually in shades of gray or tan or sometimes a sickly green, designed to hide scuff marks and dirt. Your shoes squeaked against it when the floors were freshly waxed, and you could slide in your socks if you were brave enough to take your shoes off in the gym. The walls were painted in those institutional colors, pale yellow or mint green or that odd peachy beige that appeared in every school, every hospital, every government building. About 4 feet up from the floor, there was usually a different color, a darker stripe or wainscoting, because the lower part of the wall took more abuse from hundreds of kids brushing against it, bumping it with their book bags, leaning against it. Along those walls were the lockers, if you were in junior high or high school. Not the tall, narrow lockers you see in movies now, but shorter, wider ones, made of metal painted in that same institutional palette. Your locker had a combination lock, not a key, not a digital code, but a physical lock with numbers around the dial, and you had to spin it right, then left, then right again, stopping precisely on your numbers or it wouldn't open. You had your combination memorized by the second week of school. Your fingers knew the movements without thinking. 2 full turns to the right to 23, left past it once to 14, right directly to 7. The locker door was dented from years of being slammed shut, and inside it smelled like metal and old paper and whatever was rotting in the bottom that you'd forgotten about, a banana peel from 3 weeks ago maybe, or a sandwich that had escaped from your lunch bag. The inside of your locker was decorated, if you were that kind of student. Pictures cut from Tiger Beat or Teen Beat magazine, taped to the metal door with scotch tape that would leave residue, a mirror, one of those small rectangular ones with adhesive on the back, maybe a magnetic pencil holder stuck to the side. Your textbooks were stacked on the top shelf, heavy things bound in that textured cloth covering, each one stamped with the name of the school and a number. And inside the front cover was a list of every student who'd used that book before you, their names written in pencil or pen, some of them your older siblings or cousins, dating back years. The books were used, worn at the corners, the spines cracked, pages dog-eared or torn, sometimes with notes in the margins from previous students, helpful hints or just doodling or occasionally something inappropriate that made you laugh when you found it.
You carried those books from class to class, or if you were in elementary school, they stayed in your desk, that wooden or metal desk with the chair attached, the kind that had a flat writing surface that lifted up to reveal a storage compartment underneath. The desk was scarred with years of use, carved with initials and drawings, stained with ink from pens that had leaked. The storage area under the desk lid was where you kept everything, your notebook, your pencil box, your crayons if you were young enough, maybe a small toy you weren't supposed to have. It was chaos in there, papers folded and shoved in, pencils without erasers, a broken ruler, the math worksheet you were supposed to turn in last week. The desk had a groove at the top for your pencil and an inkwell hole, even though no one had used ink pens in decades. Some desks still had the remnants of ancient chewing gum stuck underneath, hardened into little gray lumps that you could feel with your fingers if you were bored enough to explore. At the front of the classroom, the teacher's desk was a fortress, a large wooden desk with drawers on both sides, and a top that was always covered with papers and books, and a coffee mug, and a bowl of hard candies that she might give you if you did well on a test. Behind the teacher's desk was the blackboard, a real blackboard, painted black or dark green, stretching across the entire front wall. The chalk sat in the tray at the bottom, white chalk mostly, but also colored chalk for special occasions, and the erasers, those felt rectangles, tan or gray, heavy with accumulated chalk dust. Clapping the erasers together was a privilege, a job the teacher gave to a student at the end of the day, and you'd take 'em outside and bang 'em together, clouds of white dust puffing out, coating your hands and clothes. Writing on the blackboard had a particular feel to it, the resistance of the chalk against the surface, the sound it made, sometimes smooth and quiet, sometimes a screech that made everyone in the room wince and cover their ears. Teachers had their own handwriting styles in chalk, some of them precise and controlled, others large and looping, and they'd write the day's assignments or math problems, and sometimes a student would be called up to work out a problem on the board in front of everyone, the chalk feeling strange in your hand, too thick or too thin, and you were always worried about making a mistake where everyone could see it. Above the blackboard, running around the top of the classroom walls, there were friezes, printed cards showing the alphabet in cursive, those elaborate loops and connections that you were supposed to master in 2nd or 3rd grade. The capital Q, the capital Z, the lowercase r that looked nothing like the printed version. You'd practice for hours in those wide-ruled composition books with the dotted middle line, copying the letters over and over, trying to make them look like the ones on the wall. Your teacher would walk around the room while you practiced, looking over your shoulder, occasionally taking your hand and guiding it through the proper motion. Some kids got it right away, others struggled for months, and there was always that moment when you realized that most adults didn't actually write in cursive anymore, that all this practice was for a skill that was already dying, though no one told you that at the time. Near the blackboard, mounted on a wheeled cart or sitting on a special table, there was often a television set, a big boxy thing, maybe 19 or 25 inches, sitting high up so everyone could see. It wasn't used often. This was before screens took over education, but when the teacher rolled it into position and turned it on, everyone perked up. It meant you were going to watch something. A film strip about the solar system, a documentary about the Civil War, maybe a rare episode of an educational program. The TV took a moment to warm up, that small dot of light expanding into a picture, and the sound came through a single speaker, tinny and sometimes unclear. If the reception was bad, someone had to get up and adjust the antenna, those rabbit ears on top, turning them this way and that until the picture cleared up. But more often than the TV, you'd have the overhead projector, that miraculous machine that sat on a table near the teacher's desk and projected whatever was on its glass surface onto the pull-down screen or directly onto the blackboard. The overhead projector was beige plastic and metal with a bright light bulb underneath and a long arm extending up to hold a mirror and lens. The teacher would write on clear plastic sheets, transparencies, with special markers, and whatever she wrote would appear huge on the wall behind her. Sometimes she'd prepare the transparencies ahead of time, notes or diagrams or math problems, and she'd lay them on the glass surface one after another, and you'd copy everything down into your notebook. The projector made a humming sound when it was on, and it got hot, and occasionally the bulb would burn out with a pop and a brief flare of light, and the teacher would have to replace it, and that meant a few minutes of free time while she fumbled with the housing, trying not to burn her fingers on the hot metal. The smell of those overhead projector markers was distinct, sharp and chemical, not quite as strong as permanent markers, but still potent enough that if you got close to a freshly written transparency, it made your nose tingle. Some kids would deliberately sniff them, chasing a little high, and teachers had to watch for that, had to keep the markers locked away when they weren't in use. But the most memorable smell in any classroom, the one that defined elementary school for an entire generation, was the mimeograph machine. Not every classroom had one, but the school did, usually in the office or in a special workroom where teachers prepared their materials. The mimeograph used a duplicating process involving a purple-blue ink that smelled sweet and chemical and absolutely intoxicating.
When your teacher handed out a worksheet fresh from the mimeograph, it was still slightly damp, and the smell was strong, and every kid in the class would lift that paper to their nose and inhale deeply, that purple ink perfume, that scent of school itself. The purple text was never quite crisp. It was slightly blurry around the edges, some letters darker than others, depending on how much pressure had been applied to the master stencil. And there was always that moment of anticipation when papers were being passed back, wondering if yours would be one of the clear copies from the top of the stack or one of the faded ones from the bottom.
Homework came home in folders, not digital files, not emails. You had a pocket folder, usually made of cardboard, covered in slick paper, maybe red or blue or green, with pockets on the inside where you'd stuff papers, assignments going home, permission slips for field trips, book order forms from Scholastic. Those Scholastic book orders were a highlight of the month, a newsprint flyer listing dozens of books you could buy for $1 or $2 each, and you'd take it home and beg your parents to let you order something, and you'd circle your choices and bring back cash or a check in an envelope, and a few weeks later, a box would arrive in your classroom, and the teacher would call out names and hand out books. And getting a new book that was yours, that you'd chosen, was a thrill that's hard to explain to someone who's grown up with instant digital access to every book ever written. You kept your pencils in a pencil box, a small plastic container with a lid that snapped shut, or maybe a fabric pencil case with a zipper. Inside, wooden pencils, yellow number 2 pencils with pink erasers that actually worked when they were new, but got hard and just smeared the graphite when they got old. You sharpened them in the pencil sharpener mounted on the wall near the teacher's desk, a mechanical sharpener bolted to the wood. With a crank handle you'd turn and turn, feeling the resistance change as the blades bit into the wood, watching the shavings curl out and fall into the small receptacle below. The sound of the pencil sharpener was a constant background noise in a classroom, that grinding, scraping sound, and there was a particular satisfaction to pulling out your pencil and seeing the perfect sharp point you'd created. Some kids would sharpen their pencils down to nothing over the course of a year, just for something to do, a reason to get up from their desk and walk across the room. You also had pens once you were old enough, but not the disposable plastic pens of today. You might have had a cartridge pen, where you'd push a small plastic cartridge of ink into the barrel, and when it ran out, you'd replace it. Or maybe a fountain pen if you were fancy, though those were falling out of favor by the 1970s. The ink was blue or black, and sometimes it would leak and you'd get it all over your fingers, and there was no easy way to wash it off. Your hands would be stained blue for days. In your pencil box or case, you probably also had a pink eraser, one of those large rectangular ones, soft and flexible, that could erase pencil marks without tearing the paper. And you had a ruler, 12 inches, made of wood or clear plastic, with inches marked on one side and centimeters on the other, and you'd use it to draw straight lines or to measure things, or sometimes as a sword in an impromptu desk battle with the kid sitting next to you when the teacher wasn't looking. At the back of the classroom, there was usually a reading corner or a bookshelf, a small library of books that belonged to the classroom. Picture books when you were young, chapter books as you got older. The books were worn, the covers torn and taped, the pages soft from being handled by hundreds of kids. Some were missing their covers entirely, but they were there, and if you finished your work early, you could go pick one and read quietly at your desk or sit on the carpet in the back corner, and for those few minutes you could disappear into a story.
The classroom also had maps, pull-down maps on rollers, spring-loaded so they'd snap back up when you were done with them. There was a map of the United States with each state in a different pastel color, a map of the world with countries labeled in tiny print, maybe a map of your state showing counties and major cities. The maps were made of cloth or heavy paper, and they smelled old, musty, and when you pulled them down, they'd sometimes stick or tear slightly at the edges. The teacher would use a pointer, a long wooden stick, or a collapsible metal pointer to indicate specific locations, and sometimes a student would be called up to find a state or a country, and you'd stand there in front of everyone, scanning the map, hoping you could remember where Montana was or how to spell Massachusetts. Hanging from the ceiling or sitting on a shelf, there might have been a globe, a physical sphere showing the Earth in 3 dimensions, mounted on a tilted axis, and you could spin it with your finger, watching the countries blur past. The globe was scratched and faded, the colors not quite matching reality, oceans too blue, deserts too uniform, but it was a tool for understanding geography in a way that flat maps couldn't quite convey. And there was something magical about holding the world in your hands, even if it was just a small plastic replica. On the teacher's desk or on a shelf, there was a bell, an actual handbell with a wooden handle and a metal dome, and the teacher would ring it to get everyone's attention, a sharp, clear sound that cut through the chaos of 30 kids talking at once. Or she might have had a small xylophone or a triangle, some percussion instrument that served the same purpose. The sound meant, stop what you're doing, look at me, listen. And you did, because that's what the sound meant, and the conditioning was so strong that even now, decades later, if you hear a similar sound, you have the urge to stop and pay attention. The school day was structured by bells, not the handbell, but the electric bells or buzzers that rang throughout the building, signaling the start of class, the end of class, lunch, recess. The bells were loud, impossible to ignore, and they controlled the rhythm of your day. You didn't leave class because you felt like it. You left when the bell rang. You didn't decide when lunch was over. The bell decided. Time was divided into periods, and the bells marked the transitions, and you learned to watch the clock on the wall, that big round clock with black numbers and black hands, waiting for the minute hand to reach the 12, knowing the bell would ring within seconds. That clock was always slightly wrong, or at least it seemed that way. Some classrooms had clocks that ran fast, others slow, and you never quite knew what the actual time was. But it didn't matter, because the bell was the ultimate authority. The clock was just a way to anticipate the bell, to know that you had 5 more minutes, 2 more minutes, 30 seconds.
When the bell rang for recess or lunch, you'd line up at the door, single file, no pushing, waiting for the teacher to lead you out into the hallway. The hallways during class changes were chaos, hundreds of kids streaming in different directions, talking, laughing, shoving, the noise echoing off the hard floors and walls. You had to navigate this river of people to get to your next class, and you had maybe 3 minutes or 5 minutes to get there, to stop at your locker if you needed to use the bathroom if you dared, because the bathrooms were their own ecosystem, a place where teachers rarely ventured, where the rules were different. The school bathrooms were institutional, cold, often dimly lit, with tile floors and tile walls, usually in that pale green or gray, and metal stall doors that didn't quite reach the floor or the ceiling, offering a bare minimum of privacy. The toilets were metal or porcelain, and they flushed with a powerful, loud whoosh. The sinks were in a row, with metal faucets that were either scalding hot or ice cold, never a comfortable in-between. There were paper towel dispensers, the kind where you had to crank a handle to get a length of rough brown paper, or maybe electric hand dryers that were supposed to dry your hands, but mostly just pushed the water around. The bathroom always smelled like industrial soap and something less pleasant, and the mirror above the sinks was scratched and often had writing on it, names and declarations and crude drawings that the janitor would scrub off, only to have them reappear the next day. The janitor was a constant presence, a man, it was almost always a man, in a uniform, gray or brown, pushing a wide dust mop down the hallways, or a rolling bucket with a mop, the smell of floor cleaners spreading in his wake. He had a cart with supplies, a ring of keys on his belt that jangled when he walked. He knew the building better than anyone, every closet, every pipe, every quirk of the heating system. If something broke, he fixed it. If something spilled, he cleaned it. And he was usually kind to the kids, or at least neutral, tolerant of the chaos that followed children everywhere.
In the cafeteria, which was also usually the gymnasium or the auditorium, depending on the school, you'd sit at long tables, maybe the kind that folded up and rolled away with attached benches. The tables were metal or laminate, easy to clean, and they had a particular smell, a combination of whatever cleaning product the janitor used and the accumulated scent of thousands of lunches. The acoustics in the cafeteria were terrible. All those hard surfaces meant that sound bounced everywhere, and the noise level during lunch was almost unbearable, a roar of conversation and laughter, and the clatter of trays and utensils. You went through a lunch line, carrying a tray, a divided plastic or metal tray with compartments for each part of your meal. The lunch ladies, always women, always wearing hairnets and aprons, served you from behind a counter, scooping food onto your tray. A scoop of mashed potatoes, a ladle of gravy, a piece of rectangular pizza, a carton of milk. The food was institutional, cooked in enormous quantities, and it tasted like it. Some of it was good, the cinnamon rolls, the pizza on Friday, the chocolate milk. Some of it was mysterious, the Salisbury steak that was more mystery than steak, the green beans that had been cooked to submission, the fruit cocktail that was mostly syrup with a few pieces of fruit floating in it. You ate what you were given, or you traded with your friends, or you threw it away and went hungry until you got home.
The milk came in small cartons, half-pint containers, white milk or chocolate milk, and they were always hard to open. There was a technique. You had to pinch the top corners and pull them apart, but it often resulted in milk squirting out or the carton collapsing and spilling. You learned to be careful. The milk was cold, sometimes too cold, so cold it hurt your teeth, and it had that particular school milk taste, slightly different from the milk at home, though it came from the same dairies. If you brought your lunch from home, you carried it in a lunchbox, a metal lunchbox with a thermos inside. The lunchbox had a picture on it, cartoon characters, TV shows, superheroes, and it was a status symbol, a way to express your identity. The lunchbox had a handle on top and a metal latch that kept it closed. Inside, your mother had packed a sandwich, probably peanut butter and jelly or bologna or tuna, wrapped in waxed paper or in a small plastic sandwich bag. There might have been a piece of fruit, an apple or a banana, a small bag of chips, maybe, or cookies, and the thermos, a small version of the adult thermos with soup or juice or Kool-Aid inside. The thermos had a cup that screwed onto the top, and you had to be careful not to lose it. The lunchbox got dented and scratched over the course of the school year, and sometimes the latch would break, and you'd have to hold it shut with a rubber band. By the end of the year, it looked like it had been through a war. And then the next year, you'd get a new one with a different picture, reflecting your evolving interests. At recess, you'd go outside to the playground, a space that was part asphalt and part dirt or grass, with equipment that was metal and wood, heavy and permanent, and completely unsafe by modern standards. There were swings, metal A-frame structures with chains and rubber seats, and you'd pump your legs to go higher and higher, seeing how far back you could lean, how high you could go before the chains went slack at the top of the arc. You'd jump off at the peak, flying through the air for a brief moment before landing hard on the ground, your knees buckling with the impact. There were seesaws, also called teeter-totters, a long plank balanced on a central fulcrum, and you'd sit on one end while a friend sat on the other, and you'd push off the ground with your feet, rising up as your friend sank down, a simple physics lesson in leverage and weight. Sometimes one kid would jump off while the other was in the air, and they'd come crashing down, the impact jarring through their spine, and everyone would laugh, even the kid who'd gotten hurt. There was a merry-go-round, a circular platform that spun around a central axis with metal bars to hold onto, and you'd run alongside it, pushing it faster and faster, then jump on and let the centrifugal force pull you outward, your body leaning back, the world spinning around you. The goal was to get it spinning as fast as possible until kids started flying off, unable to hold on, landing in the dirt and laughing.
There were monkey bars, a grid of metal bars about 6 feet off the ground, and you'd climb up and swing from bar to bar, hanging by your hands, trying to make it across without falling. The bars were cold in winter, almost burning cold, and hot in summer, warm enough to hurt your hands. And underneath was dirt or wood chips, nothing soft or forgiving. So when you fell, and you did fall, it hurt.
There was a slide, metal and tall, with a ladder up one side and a long, slippery slope down the other. In summer, the metal got hot enough to burn your legs, and you'd go down so fast you'd get a static shock when you touched the ground at the bottom. In winter, it was cold and sometimes icy, and you'd slide down even faster. There was no warning about any of this, no padding, no safety features. You just learned to be careful, or you learned the hard way. Around the playground, there was probably a chain-link fence, and beyond that, the neighborhood, houses and streets that you could see but couldn't reach during school hours. The fence marked the boundary between school and freedom, and you'd stand at it sometimes during recess, looking out, counting down the hours until you could go home. You played games that required no equipment: tag, freeze tag, Red Rover, kickball with a big red rubber ball that was kept in a shed or a closet near the playground. The games had rules that varied from school to school, from playground to playground, but everyone knew them, passed down through generations of kids, adapted and modified, but essentially the same. Red Rover required 2 lines of kids holding hands, and one team would call someone from the other team to run and try to break through the line, and if they couldn't, they'd join the other team. It was violent and somewhat dangerous, and eventually schools banned it, but for years it was just what you did at recess. The girls might have jumped rope, long ropes turned by 2 people while others jumped in the middle, chanting rhymes, Miss Mary Mac, 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 all dressed in black, black, black. Or they'd play hopscotch, a grid drawn in chalk on the asphalt, tossing a stone and hopping through the squares on one foot. Or jacks, a small rubber ball and metal jacks, scooping 'em up between bounces. The boys might have played marbles, though that was already fading by the 1970s, or traded baseball cards, flipping 'em against the wall. Whoever got closest to the wall won both cards. Or they'd play Foursquare, a game with a rubber ball and a court divided into 4 squares painted on the asphalt, each player defending their square, trying to knock the others out by bouncing the ball in their area and making it hard to return. When recess ended, a teacher would blow a whistle, a sharp, piercing sound that carried across the playground, and everyone would freeze, then line up by class, then march back inside, hot and sweaty and dirt-streaked, ready to settle back into the quiet work of the classroom. Back inside, in the afternoon, there might be music class, and you'd go to a special room, the music room, which had risers where you'd stand in rows, arranged by height, learning to sing together. The music teacher played the piano, an upright piano against one wall, and she'd teach you songs, folk songs, patriotic songs, songs from musicals. This Land Is Your Land, America the Beautiful, Do-Re-Mi from The Sound of Music. You'd sing in unison, or sometimes in rounds, and occasionally in simple harmony, learning to hear your part while others sang theirs. There might have been instruments in the music room, a set of bells, a xylophone, tambourines, triangles, rhythm sticks, simple percussion instruments that elementary school kids could handle. In later grades, in middle school or junior high, there might have been a band, and kids would learn to play actual instruments, trumpets, clarinets, flutes, drums. The instruments were old, battered, loaned out by the school, smelling like brass polish and old spit, and you'd carry 'em home in hard cases to practice, squeaking and honking your way through scales and simple songs.
There was also art class in an art room that smelled like paint and clay and paste. The tables were covered with newspaper or butcher paper, and you'd work on projects, painting, drawing, making things out of construction paper and glue. There were jars of tempera paint, thick and opaque, in primary colors and white and black, and you'd mix them on a paper plate or a palette to create the colors you wanted. The brushes were cheap, with bristles that fell out and handles that were chewed and split.
You'd paint pictures of houses and trees and suns with rays, or abstract designs, or whatever the teacher assigned. And when you were done, she'd write your name on the back and hang it on a clothesline strung across the room to dry, dozens of paintings fluttering like flags. There was clay, gray or terracotta, slightly damp, that you'd shape with your hands or with tools, wooden sticks and wire loops. You'd make pinch pots and coil pots and animals and simple sculptures, and if the school had a kiln, they'd be fired and glazed, and you'd take them home weeks later, proud of what you'd made, even if it was lopsided and crude. There was papier-mâché, strips of newspaper dipped in paste, flour and water mixed into a thick goop, layered over a balloon or a wire frame to create masks or piñatas or sculptures. The paste got everywhere, on your hands, your clothes, the table, and it smelled like sour flour, and your creation would take days to dry, sitting on a shelf, gradually hardening into something permanent. In the hallways, between classrooms, there were bulletin boards, large cork boards framed in wood, covered with colored paper and decorations. The boards displayed student work, essays, artwork, projects, or announcements about upcoming events, or motivational posters with slogans like "Reading is fun" or "Reach for the stars." The bulletin boards were changed regularly, reflecting the seasons and the curriculum, and there was something satisfying about seeing your work pinned up there for everyone to see, your name written at the bottom, proof that you'd accomplished something worth displaying. There were also trophy cases, glass-fronted cabinets displaying the school's achievements, trophies from sports teams, plaques from academic competitions, maybe a football or basketball signed by a team from years ago. The trophies were gold or silver plastic with little figures on top, a player mid-throw, a runner, a scholar, and they were dusty and fading, but they represented pride, history, the ongoing story of the school. In the office, where you'd go if you were sick or in trouble or needed to call your parents, there was a long counter, and behind it sat the school secretary, the gatekeeper, the person who knew everything about everyone. She had a typewriter on her desk, a manual or electric typewriter, and she'd type attendance reports and permission slips and letters to parents, the keys clacking in a steady rhythm. She had a phone, a multi-line phone, with buttons that lit up when someone was calling, and she'd answer it, "Jefferson Elementary, how may I help you?" in a voice that was professional and slightly bored.
On the wall behind the secretary was a PA system, a box with switches and a microphone, and in the morning the principal or the secretary would make announcements over the intercom, their voice crackling into every classroom simultaneously. You'd hear the click and the buzz as the system activated, and everyone would stop and listen. The Pledge of Allegiance was recited over the PA, everyone standing, hands over hearts, facing the flag that hung in the corner of every classroom. There might be announcements about schedule changes, reminders about permission slips due, congratulations to a sports team or a class that had done well. The principal's office was nearby, a small room with a desk and chairs, and going there was either a great honor or a terrible punishment, depending on why you'd been summoned. The principal was an authority figure, distant and somewhat intimidating, a person who knew your name but whom you didn't really know. He might have had a paddle hanging on his wall, even if corporal punishment was being phased out, a wooden paddle with holes drilled in it to reduce air resistance, a relic of an earlier era when principals could and did spank students who misbehaved. By the 1970s and 1980s, it was less common, controversial, but the paddle was still there, a threat, a reminder. If you were sick, you'd go to the nurse's office, a small room with a cot, a desk, and cabinets full of supplies. The nurse was usually kind, maternal, and she'd take your temperature with a glass thermometer, the kind that had mercury inside and had to be shaken down and placed under your tongue for a minute. She'd look at your throat with a tongue depressor,
feel your forehead with the back of her hand, and decide whether you needed to go home or just lie down for a while. The cot had a plastic cover that crinkled when you lay on it, and a thin blanket that smelled like disinfectant. You'd lie there, listening to the sounds of the school going on without you, wondering if your mother would come get you, or if you'd have to go back to class. The nurse had Band-Aids, the fabric kind, tan, that stuck well but hurt when you pulled them off. She had gauze and tape for bigger scrapes. She had ice packs, the chemical kind that you'd squeeze to activate, and they'd get cold but not freezing, and you'd hold them to your bruised knee or your bumped head. She had cough drops, cherry or menthol, that you'd suck on slowly, trying to make them last. In the library, which might have been called the media center by the 1980s, there were shelves and shelves of books, organized by the Dewey Decimal System, each book with a card pocket glued inside the back cover, and a card inside the pocket listing everyone who'd checked it out, their names and the dates written in pencil. When you wanted to check out a book, you'd take it to the librarian's desk, and she'd pull the card from the pocket, stamp it with a DEET stamp, a satisfying chunk as the stamp hit the ink pad, and then the card, and tuck the card into a file at her desk. The book was yours for 2 weeks, and if you didn't return it on time, you'd get a notice, a slip of paper that said overdue, and maybe a small fine. 5 cents a day or something similarly inconsequential, but still shameful.
The library had tables where you could sit and read, and it was quiet, a refuge from the chaos of the hallways and the playground. The librarian would shush you if you talked too loud, a finger to her lips, a stern look, and you'd whisper or be silent. There were encyclopedias in the reference section, World Book or Britannica, and you'd use them for research, copying facts into your notebook for reports. There was a card catalog, a large wooden cabinet with dozens of small drawers, each one filled with index cards listing every book in the library, organized by author, title, and subject. You'd flip through the cards, looking for what you needed, writing down the call numbers, then navigating the shelves to find the books. It was a skill, learning to use the card catalog and the Dewey Decimal System, and once you mastered it, you could find anything. The library also had film strips and records, and sometimes the librarian would show a film strip, threading it into the projector, advancing it frame by frame, while a record played the narration, a beep on the recording telling her when to advance to the next frame. The film strips were educational, about history or science or literature, and they were slightly boring, but also a break from regular classwork, so no one complained. In gym class, you'd go to the gymnasium, a large open space with a wooden floor marked with lines for basketball and volleyball, and you'd change into gym clothes, shorts and a t-shirt usually, in the locker room, a space with benches and lockers and a smell that was uniquely and unforgettably locker room, a combination of sweat and old socks and industrial cleaner. You'd play dodgeball, a game that was thrilling and brutal, where the goal was to hit other people with a rubber ball while avoiding being hit yourself. Or you'd play kickball or basketball, or you'd do calisthenics, jumping jacks and sit-ups and push-ups, the gym teacher counting them out in a loud voice. The gym teacher was often a coach, someone who also coached one of the school's sports teams, and he or she was athletic and demanding and not particularly sympathetic if you weren't good at sports. You were expected to try, to participate, to give it your best effort, even if your best effort was not very good. Gym class was where the social hierarchy of physical ability was on full display, where the athletic kids excelled and the clumsy kids suffered, and there was no hiding it. You'd climb the rope that hung from the ceiling, hand over hand, using your feet to grip and push, trying to reach the top and touch the ceiling, a feat that only the strongest kids could manage. Or you'd run laps around the gym, the squeaking of sneakers on the polished floor, the echo of the gym teacher's whistle. Or you'd do the presidential physical fitness test, a series of exercises, sit-ups, pull-ups, shuttle run, standing long jump, timed and measured and compared to national standards, and you'd get a certificate if you did well, a patch you could sew onto your jacket. At the end of the day, when the final bell rang, you'd gather your things, your books and your homework, and you'd head for the door, out into the hallway, down to your locker if you had one, then out the front doors, those heavy doors that pushed open easily from the inside, and you'd step out into the afternoon, the sun bright after the fluorescent lights of the classroom, and you'd walk home or get on the bus. The school bus was yellow, always yellow, a big lumbering vehicle with a high step-up and rows of bench seats covered in green or brown vinyl. The windows opened by sliding up, and in warm weather they were always open, the breeze blowing through, carrying the smell of diesel exhaust. The bus driver was a fixture, someone who drove the same route every day, who knew which stop was yours, who enforced the rules: sit down, no yelling, no fighting, keep your hands to yourself. The bus was loud, everyone talking at once, and it swayed and bounced over the roads, and you'd slide across the vinyl seat on sharp turns. Some kids walked home, in groups or alone, along sidewalks or paths worn through empty lots, carrying their books in their arms or in a backpack, not the large ergonomic backpacks of today, but simple canvas or nylon bags with 1 or 2 compartments. You'd walk slowly, stopping to look at things, to talk with friends, in no hurry to get home, because there was no one there yet. Your parents were still at work, and you had a key on a string around your neck, a latchkey kid, and you'd let yourself in and make a snack and watch TV until your parents got home. But in that moment, stepping out of the school at the end of the day, there was a sense of release, of freedom, of another day completed. The school remained behind you, that building full of smells and sounds and memories, that place where you spent more waking hours than anywhere else, where you learned to read and write and calculate, where you learned to stand in line and raise your hand and wait your turn, where you made friends and enemies, where you succeeded and failed, where you grew up, day by day, year by year, in classrooms that all looked the same, and yet each held its own particular character, its own particular place in your memory. You may remember your teacher's name, the one from 3rd grade or 5th grade, the one who was kind or strict, who made learning exciting or tedious, who saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself. You may remember your best friend from those years, the one who sat next to you, who shared their lunch, who passed notes during class. You may remember the feel of the wooden desk under your hands, the sound of chalk on the blackboard, the smell of the mimeograph paper, the taste of cafeteria pizza, the sting of cold metal on the playground in winter.
These were ordinary days in ordinary schools. Nothing special about them at the time, just the routine of childhood, the structure that held your days together. But they're gone now, those schools, or changed beyond recognition. The overhead projectors are in landfills, the mimeograph machines are museum pieces, the metal playground equipment has been replaced with plastic and rubber, safe and sanitized. The card catalogs are gone, replaced by computers. The film strips and records and wall-mounted pencil sharpeners and chalkboards have all disappeared, made obsolete by technology and changing standards and time. What remains is memory, imperfect and filtered through years, but vivid in its details. You can still see the classroom, can still hear the sounds, can still feel what it was like to be a child in that place, navigating a world that seemed permanent and unchanging, but was already in the process of vanishing, one small piece at a time, until the day you look back and realize that everything you took for granted, every ordinary object and ritual and routine has slipped away into history, and what you're left with is this: the memory of how it was, the knowledge of what you've lost, and perhaps, if you're lucky, a sense of gratitude that you were there, that you experienced it, that it shaped you in ways both obvious and subtle, that it made you who you are. The school bell has rung for the last time in that world, and recess is over, and the building stands empty or repurposed, and the children you were have grown into adults who sometimes pause in the middle of a busy day and remember the smell of chalk dust, the feel of a wooden desk, the sound of a pencil sharpener grinding away, the simple, complicated, irretrievable experience of going to school in America when things were different, when the world moved slower, when childhood lasted a little longer, when you didn't know yet that all of this would someday be nothing more than memory.